Have you ever done something that nearly destroyed you and then worked every single day for months to climb back out, only to find out that the people who were supposed to be waiting for you at the top had already moved on without you? That happened to me. I'm not proud of everything that came before, but I did the work. I want you to know that before anything else. I did the work. My name is Richard. I'm 62 years old. I spent 31 years as a high school history teacher in Dayton, Ohio. I coached JV baseball for 11 of those years. I graded papers on Saturday mornings and stayed late on Tuesdays to help kids who were struggling. I was the guy who kept a jar of peanut butter crackers in his desk drawer because some of my students came in without breakfast and I didn't want hunger to be the reason they couldn't focus. I tell you that not to make myself sound like a hero. I tell you that because I want you to understand who I was before everything fell apart, and who I had to find my way back to. My wife, Patricia, died on a Wednesday in March 4 years ago. Pancreatic cancer, 8 weeks from diagnosis to gone. 8 weeks. We had been married 34 years. She was the kind of woman who remembered everyone's birthday, who kept a paper calendar on the fridge with little stars next to the days she was proud of. After she died, I stopped looking at the fridge. I stopped looking at most things. I won't walk you through all of it. Some of it I'm still not ready to say out loud. What I'll tell you is that I retired early. I stayed home and I started drinking. Not right away. Slowly, the way a house doesn't flood all at once. It's a slow leak behind the wall that you ignore until one day the ceiling caves. By the time my son called it a problem, I'd been a problem for almost 2 years. My son's name is Derek. He's 36. He married a woman named Tiffany 7 years ago. I was at the wedding. I danced with Patricia's photo on my phone at the reception because she wasn't there to see it. I thought Tiffany was fine, at first. Organized, practical. The kind of person who always had an opinion about what other people should be doing differently. Derek called me one Sunday morning. I remember it was Sunday because I could hear a church program playing on their TV in the background. He said, "Dad, we need to talk about what's happening." I knew what he meant. I'd been waiting for someone to say it, honestly. I just didn't think it would be Derek who called instead of showed up. He didn't come. He never came to my house to have that conversation with me face to face. He called. And on the call, Tiffany spoke more than he did. She had done research. She had printed out a list of treatment facilities. She had a recommendation. A place in Columbus, 90 minutes away, a 21-day residential program for alcohol dependency. She made it sound like she was scheduling a furnace inspection. Efficient. Done. I went. I agreed because somewhere under the fog I still knew that Patricia would not have wanted this from me. That's the only reason I agreed. But 21 days turned into more. When I got there and they assessed me and sat me down and really talked to me, they said I needed longer. They said my situation was more layered than a 3-week detox. They had a longer program, 45 days residential, followed by structured outpatient. They said it could genuinely change things for me. I called Derek and told him. There was a pause on the line, and then you said, "Tiffany thinks that makes sense. Not I think that makes sense. Not I'll come see you, Dad. Tiffany thinks. I want to be fair. I was not easy to love during those years. I know that. I missed Derek's birthday dinner one year because I was in no condition to drive and I didn't call. I said things I shouldn't have said. I understand why there was distance. I understand it. But understand it's something and not being hurt by it. Those aren't the same thing. 45 days. That's how long I was in Columbus. I did the group sessions. I did the one-on-one therapy. I talked about Patricia more than I'd talked about her to anyone since the funeral. I talked about the guilt. The specific, crushing guilt of the survivor who wonders if he could have noticed sooner, pushed harder, found a different doctor. My therapist, a quiet man named Dr. Okafor, would let me say all of it and then say, in his calm way, "Richard, grief that has nowhere to go becomes something else." He was right. That's exactly what had happened to me. I made a friend there. A man named Terrence, 58, former electrician from Cincinnati, would sit on the bench outside after dinner and not say much. Just breathe. He told me once, "The hardest thing about this place isn't getting sober. It's figuring out what you're going to go home to." I didn't know how right he was when he said it. By the time I was 2 weeks from discharge, I was feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Not happiness exactly, more like presence, like I was actually inside my own life again instead of watching it through a dirty window. I called Derek to arrange pickup. He said sure. He said he'd be there. He said the date out loud. I repeated it. He confirmed it. Saturday, the 9th, 10 in the morning. He said, "I'll be there, Dad, I promise." I was ready at 9:45. I had my duffel bag and a box with a few things I'd accumulated, a book, a plant someone had given me, a journal I'd filled with writing that was private and important. I sat in the lobby. I watched the clock. 10 o'clock. Nobody. 10:30. I called Derek. It went to voicemail. 11 o'clock. I called again. Voicemail. I went to the front desk and asked if anyone had called for me. Nothing. The woman behind the desk was kind about it. She offered to call me a cab. I said I'd wait a little longer. At 11:20, Derek texted. Not called. Texted. "Sorry, Dad, something came up. Can you get a ride? I'll explain later." I sat there holding my phone and read that text 4 times. Something came up. 45 days. And something came up. I had $63 in my wallet and a debit card I hadn't used in 6 weeks. I didn't know what my account balance was. I didn't know if Derek had been managing the bills I'd asked him to handle while I was away. I didn't know anything about my own life because I had trusted him to keep it steady while I was doing the hardest work I'd ever done. I picked up my box and my bag and I walked outside. It was cold. Ohio in late February is not kind. The sky was the color of old dishwater. I stood under the overhang at the entrance and tried to think clearly. I could call a cab. I could call Terrence. But he'd been discharged 4 days earlier, and I didn't want to burden him. I could sit here and wait and hope Derek came through. I set my box down on top of my bag and I sat on it. Just sat there. A man came out of the facility behind me. I didn't look up at first. I heard him stop, and then he said, "Excuse me, are you waiting for someone?" I said, "I thought I was." He sat down on the low brick wall near the entrance. He was maybe mid-30s, wearing a good coat, carrying a laptop bag. He'd been visiting someone inside, I assumed. He said, "I don't mean to intrude. You just look like you can use a cup of coffee." I looked at him then. I didn't recognize him. He said his name was James Whitfield. He said he was a family law attorney in Dayton. He said he'd been there visiting his uncle, who was in the program. I introduced myself, Richard Calloway, retired teacher. Something shifted in his face when I said it. He looked at me differently. He said, "Calloway, did you ever teach at Belmont High School?" I said I had. 31 years. He was quiet for a second. Then he said, "Mr. Calloway, you were my 10th grade history teacher, 2003 to 2004. I looked at him hard. I tried to place him. It had been 20 years. He said I was James Whitfield. I sat in the 3rd row. I failed your first 2 unit tests and you kept me after class. And then I remembered, not the face. Faces change. But I remembered a kid who was failing and embarrassed about it and trying very hard not to show either. I kept him after class 3 or 4 times that semester. I lent him my copy of a supplemental text because the school's copies were all checked out. At Christmas that year, I found out his family was having a hard time financially, and I quietly made sure he had a bus pass for the rest of the year so he could actually get to school. I didn't make a thing of it. I just left it in an envelope in his locker with his name on it. I had forgotten completely. That's the truth. I had forgotten because it wasn't something I thought about. It was just what you did when a kid needed something. He hadn't forgotten. James said, "I graduated. I got a partial scholarship to Ohio State. I didn't think I was smart enough for law school and I almost didn't apply. But I thought about you telling me that failing 2 tests doesn't mean you failed yourself." He paused. "I've been practicing for 9 years. We stood there in the cold and I didn't know what to say. I said something like, 'I'm glad things worked out for you.' He said, 'What's going on with you today, Mr. Calloway? Where's your ride?' And something about the way he asked it, like he genuinely wanted to know, like he wasn't going to be uncomfortable with the answer, made me tell him the truth, all of it. Patricia, the drinking, the 45 days, Derek's text. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Let me drive you home." I said that wasn't necessary. He said, "It's necessary to me." In the car, he asked if I'd been keeping up with my finances while I was away. I said I'd asked Derek to handle a few things: the utility auto payments, my property taxes that were coming due, and one certificate of deposit that was maturing at the bank. I'd given him limited signing authority because I wasn't sure what I'd need while I was gone. James asked, very carefully, what kind of signing authority. I told him. It was a limited power of attorney, just for specific accounts and the property tax. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "When did the CD mature?" I said 3 weeks ago, roughly. About $47,000. He was going to roll into savings. He didn't say anything alarming. He just said, "When you get settled, it might be worth taking a close look at your accounts." I thought he was being a careful lawyer, being cautious. I didn't push it. He dropped me at my house, carried my box to the door. Before he left, he gave me his card and said, "Call me if you need anything. I mean it." I walked into my house for the first time in 45 days. It smelled stale. The fridge had been cleaned out. The mail was stacked on the kitchen table. Derek had been checking it at least. I put Patricia's photo back on the counter where it belonged, and I stood there in the quiet. Then I opened my laptop and logged into my bank account. The CD had not rolled into savings. $47,000 had been transferred to a joint checking account I didn't recognize. The account name showed Derek's name and Tiffany's name. The transfer had been authorized using the power of attorney I'd signed before I left. I sat down on the kitchen floor. I don't know why the floor. I just couldn't make it to a chair. I called James the next morning. I told him what I'd found. He wasn't surprised. He said he'd seen it before, more often than people would believe. He said, "Richard, this is financial elder abuse. It's a civil matter and potentially a criminal one. The power of attorney you signed had specific limitations. If they used it beyond those limitations, they violated the law." He said he would take my case. He said we'd start by sending a formal letter demanding return of the funds, and simultaneously filing a report with Adult Protective Services and the Ohio Attorney General's office. I said, "James, I can't afford." He cut me off. Gently. He said, "Mr. Calloway, you gave me a bus pass in 2003. You probably don't even remember it." He paused. "I've been waiting 20 years to pay something back. Please let me do this." I did let him. What followed was not fast and it was not clean. Derek called me twice during the process. The first call, he was defensive, said Tiffany had handled it, said he thought I'd agreed to it, said there was a miscommunication. I listened without speaking much. The second call came 3 weeks later, and it was different. He was alone, I could tell. His voice was smaller. He said, "Dad, I didn't know all of it. I swear to you, I didn't know everything she did with it." I believe part of that. Tiffany had handled the paperwork. Tiffany had spoken to the bank. Derek had signed where she told him to sign. That's not innocence exactly. You don't sign things you don't read, especially when it involves your father's money while he's in treatment. But I understood how a person can get so deep inside a relationship that they stop asking questions they should ask. James filed. The documentation was airtight. Within 6 weeks, we received a settlement agreement, full return of the $47,000 plus interest in exchange for not pursuing criminal charges. Tiffany's attorney advised her to settle quickly. She did. The money was back in my account on a Tuesday afternoon. I sat at my kitchen table and stared at the confirmation number on my screen for a long time. It's been 11 months since the day I stood in that parking lot with $63 in a box with a plant in it. I want to tell you how things are now, because I think you deserve the full picture. I'm sober. I have been for 11 months and 15 days as of today, and I am not going to pretend that's not something I'm proud of. I go to meetings twice a week at a church hall 4 blocks from my house. I have a sponsor named Walter who is 71 and has been sober for 22 years and who once told me, the goal isn't to not need a drink. The goal is to build a life so full that you don't have room for one. I'm working on that. I started volunteering at Belmont High School again. Just 2 afternoons a week, helping in the history department. Not teaching, not officially. Just being there. Helping kids who are struggling with the material. Keeping crackers in my bag again because some things don't change. Derek and I are talking. Slowly. Carefully. He and Tiffany are separated. That happened on its own, apart from everything with me. He called me in December and asked if he could come over for dinner. I said yes. I made chili, because that's what Patricia used to make on cold nights, and it felt right. We sat at the table for 3 hours and talked more honestly than we had in years. He cried. I didn't, but not because I didn't feel it. I just think I'd already done so much of that work in Columbus, with Dr. Okafor, that I'd gotten through the worst of it before this conversation. We're not where we were before Patricia died. I don't know if we'll get there, but we're somewhere. We're trying. James and I have lunch every few months. He's doing well. He made partner last year. He still has the same quiet way about him that he had at 15, just listening, not rushing. I hope I had a small part in that. He tells me I did. I believe him more than I used to. What I keep coming back to, what I think about on the nights when the old heaviness tries to creep in, is the way a single ordinary thing can circle back to you across decades. A bus pass, a supplemental textbook, staying after class with a kid who was too proud to ask for help. I didn't do those things because I expected anything. I did them because a student was in front of me and needed something, and I had the ability to give it. I almost didn't make it. I want to be honest about that. There were nights in Columbus where the weight of everything felt unsurvivable. Patricia gone, Derek distant, my career over, 30 years of a life that suddenly felt like it belonged to someone else. I came very close to deciding it wasn't worth the climb back up. But I climbed, and on the other side of the climb there was a man in a parking lot who remembered a bus pass from 2003, and who drove me home, and who gave me back $47,000, and my dignity, and the proof that the things you do quietly and without expectation still exist somewhere in the world, still matter, still have the power to come back to you when you are standing in the cold with $63 and nowhere to go. The people who counted on me to stay broken were wrong. I'm still here. And for the first time in a long time, I'm glad about that. I've thought a lot about what actually happened. Not the legal part, not the money part, but the deeper mechanics of how it all unfolded the way it did. James didn't show up in that parking lot because the universe owed me something. He showed up because 22 years earlier, I made a choice, a small, quiet, completely forgettable choice. A bus pass in an envelope. A kid who was struggling and too proud to ask for help. I didn't do it to collect on it later. I didn't even remember doing it. That's the thing about the choices that end up mattering most. You usually don't know they matter when you make them. What I've come to understand is that character compounds. Not like interest in a bank account, not in some tidy mathematical way, but it does accumulate. The kind of person you are across 30 years of ordinary days doesn't disappear when your life falls apart. It waits. And sometimes, when you're standing in a cold parking lot with $63 and a plant in a box, it walks back out to find you. I think about Derek, too. I spent a long time being angry at him, and I won't pretend I wasn't. But anger that has no place to go becomes something else. I learned that in Columbus. What I've landed on is this. Derek made choices that came from weakness, not from cruelty. He let someone else do his thinking for him. He signed papers he should have read. He sent a text when he should have gotten in a car. Those were failures of courage, not of love. And I know something about what it feels like to fail people you love because you're not strong enough in a particular moment. I know that very well. Tiffany made different choices, calculated ones. And those choices had consequences that had nothing to do with me pursuing revenge. They simply had to do with the fact that what you do in the dark has a way of requiring daylight eventually. That's not justice delivered from above. That's just the basic math of actions and outcomes playing out the way it almost always does when someone overestimates how untouchable they are. What I carry forward is this: intelligence without integrity is just a more efficient way to cause damage. I taught history for 31 years, and the lesson that history keeps repeating, in nations, in families, in individual lives, is that the people who build things quietly and consistently outlast the people who take shortcuts. Every time. The shortcuts feel faster. They sometimes even work for a while. But they don't hold. And resilience, getting back up, that's not something you either have or you don't. It's something you practice. I practiced it badly for 2 years after Patricia died, and then I practiced it better, in Columbus, one day at a time, until the muscle remembered how to work again. Nobody gave me that. I built it by showing up for myself on the days I least wanted to. I'm still building it. That's all any of us can do.